Pleasure to be here. I hope I don't start to cry. But it really is wonderful to see you and to be reading this book here. This is the first reading I've given for the book. And I think it's very appropriate that it's here in Madoc Township, in Madoc. And so this is a local story, but it's about war, so I hope that the implications of this story are very far-reaching in a world that is torn with war and violence everywhere. It's a book of fiction, though, but written from a lot of memories that I have from my young days when I lived here long ago in the 40s and 50s, before my father took us up to Ottawa. And I was fortunate in having my voices, I heard the voices of my elders of the past here when I was writing this. But I want you to understand that this is a book of fiction, totally from the imagination, but it's set within real time, the First World War, 1914 to 18, and the places that it's written from are real. The battlefields are very real. They took place, there's scenes here from Passchendaele, Gravenstoffel Ridge, where the first gas attack took place in April of 1915. Mount Sorrel, where Will was wounded, and others. And then Madoc Township and the homestead where I grew up. Will Sanford bought that place just north of Keller's Bridge on the right-hand side. It sits high now, but it sits low now, below the road, but before it was way above the road, and it was a lovely spot. The other setting for this novel is a Trappist monastery on the western front. Now, there are many of these Trappist monasteries along the northern part of France, and they're all on a pinnacle, on a mountain, a small mountain, not big mountains, of course. And why is this here? It's because being on a mountain, the Germans wanted it, and so did the British. So this figures very prominently. Will let me just stop here, because I want to talk now about the characters. I think I've said enough about the monastery. It's there, and we'll get into that further on. If I don't, remind me. But we have Will. The characters are three, the three main characters. Will Nickel from Keller's Bridge, who's a carpenter, farmer, machinist, a jack of all trades, as a lot of our guys are, even now. Very handy, very adaptable. And his best friend is Michael Isaacs, whom he meets right away when they come off the boat at Plymouth, England. Michael is a Mohawk from Tyendinaga Reserve. He's a teacher. He was very well educated by his reverend, his Anglican minister. And the little boy was a genius, and he learned languages. He took a degree at Queen's, and he wanted to get into medicine but couldn't because he was an Aboriginal at that time. So they spent 5 years together, and they were part of the first contingent who arrived in 1914, and they miraculously lived out the war together until they came back in July of 1919. This book pleads against war, although we know that sometimes we have to fight them. And but war destroys the soul, or can, and the problem of war always falls on the veterans in its aftermath, and on the family of veterans, the children and the wives, which is why we have to make sure, hopefully, that this government is going to provide more money for this horrible thing called post-traumatic stress disorder. In Will's day, and he had it, it was called shell shock. So they had the misfortune, these two, because they were leaders. They were ordered by the British to take a platoon into and up the hill to the monastery to rout the Germans from their position there, which they did. But some curious things happened, and I don't want to tell you what they were. I'd give it away. But atrocities were committed. So we have the three main characters of Will Nickel. Leah is a perplexing character. She loves Will. He loves her. They shouldn't, because they're 4 years apart, but after all, she is his niece. This is what they wrestle with in this book. I wanted to take it out, but they wouldn't let me. It's hard to write about things like this. Now, anyway, I'll let you see how it works out. Now, at 3 parts, it's written in 3 parts. Part 1 is the homestead. In August of 1919, Will Nickel's farm, which he owns in joint ownership by will of her father, his brother. Part 2 takes place entirely in the Trappist monastery from January, as after armistice, January to July of 1919 for 6 months. And they are sent there actually because they're so sick, especially Will, and the officer sends them back there, calling them names, you've got to get back there, and here's your way back. Because the Trappists are the people who can help you. And part 3 then returns 8 years later, in August of 1927, when Michael Brings comes home from his job at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which was called the Imperial War Grave Commission, where he'd stayed. So this takes place in August of 1927, when he brings Will the Victoria Cross, which Will has not been able to accept, from the whiskey he had been sipping since leaving Montreal. Beyond the train window, the distant hills appeared on the northern horizon. He followed their black outline with his eyes, comforted by the familiar landscape in which he was now traveling, this narrow, fertile belt of land bordering Lake Ontario, with rivers spilling into its bays and the rock-faced Canadian Shield to the north. Tomorrow he would be at Keller's Bridge, at his farm on the Moira River, home with Leah. Will Nickel picked up the photograph of Leah that he'd carried with him these past 5 years. Her dead husband scissored out. He rubbed the torn edges between his fingers and placed it on the empty seat, alongside the others he cherished. His mother, infant Helen, and Michael Isaacs. Today, the bullet wound was torture. Pain seared right through the right side of his groin and into his gut, radiating all the way back into the spine. His muscles ached from bracing himself against the sway of the train, which had undone all the benefits of the Atlantic crossing, the salt air, the food, the stout. He coughed a dry, persistent cough. Glancing around to see if anyone was paying attention, he removed the Mickey from the haversack lying at his feet and took a short pull. Will leaned his head against the hard seat. His neck was aching. He bent forward, pushing his butt into the seat, and reached inside his jacket pocket for his watch. Another hour before the station, and the August heat was killing. "How are you doing here, Sergeant Nickel?" The conductor had been keeping an eye on him. Will tucked a leg over the haversack and replied, "Awful rough track the whole way through from Montreal." The conductor sighed, looking away to the lake. "Been a lot of changes with the Grand Trunk Railway. My bet the company will declare bankruptcy. Then where'll I be, I wonder?" Will reached for his cigarettes. "I took the train west 9 years ago." He smiled up at the conductor. I went to work the wheat." He frowned and tapped his cigarette against the packet. He coughed, choking on phlegm. Leaning over, the conductor whispered, "What happened to you? Was you gassed? At Ypres, I mean." "Oh, if I guess at Gravenstoffel Ridge," Will replied. "Take it easy, Sergeant. Keep that bottle in your kit." The conductor removed his timepiece from his vest pocket. "Should be in Trenton by 3:10. He touched Will lightly on his shoulder. "No sense in courting trouble, son." He moved away and pushed down the aisle. Courting trouble? Might it not be too late? Should he run away as he'd done before to the west? In the west he'd climbed off the train, grasses at his feet, and a caress of wind as the faraway fields of wheat broke into uneven waves and moved in shifting lines towards where he stood. Leah would never need to know. He struck a match to a cigarette. A housefly stuck fast to the window of the train, a sign of oppressive heat, but he made no movement to brush it away, as it didn't annoy him. Rather, the fly made him think of former summer heat waves, of his parents worrying over an early harvest, and of his ailing mother, the waxy skin of her face pulled taut, calling from the wooden divan, "Get along, child, and help your father. Get out there. Help him stoop." Her down-covered arm appeared thin and freckle-brown. She had fallen ill that season. "Now the day is over. Night is drawing nigh." Will mouthed the words to her Eden hymn. The housefly landed on Will's knuckle, rubbing its legs together, tickling his hands. He let it play there with its luminous purple body. Back home now with this heat, the cows would be moving in close to the riverbank, and Leah would be toiling away. In her last letter, she'd written, "I'm planting barley this May, as the distiller wants all he can get. With prohibition, the price should soar. You mustn't worry about winter," read her postscript, "because there's work near home. Repair of motors at a branch plant." In all these years, she'd never wavered. Despite the odds, she'd remained resolute, strong-willed. Even in childhood, she'd been mulish, slicing her words. The fly lifted and adhered once more in the window. A fly flies. A man runs, but where does he affix himself? And toward what purpose? Far off now, it seemed. The train whistled, the fly buzzed circles in front of him. The sun beat through the window. One springtime day in childhood make-believe play she'd called, "Will, pull those branches down and make me a banquet hall." Leah had perched herself on the throne of lilacs that he had piled high. She leaned over him. "Kneel, Sir Walter." Her white lace handkerchief fluttered to the ground. "Bow down to your Queen Bess. Heads must roll. Then let the dance begin." He had run to the house, leaving her to play alone. "Heads must roll," he said. For an instant, he saw the twin towers of the monastery, and below, the gaping, bombed-out hole in the sanctuary door. Will pinched the smoldering cigarette butt hard between his fingers and reached down for his Mickey. He'd done his share of killing, and Leah must never know. Blue weed-streaked fields, small and mean, passed before his window and disappeared over steeply rounded hillocks. Rock fences marked the measure of their yield. A measly few inches of topsoil covered the stratum. He sipped the whiskey again. The train sped forward. His head whirled, his stomach heaved. He felt he might vomit. "Get out there, get out there, get out there." The words thundered off the rails beneath him. A level crossing shot past. The pistons pounded. Will broke into a sweat. "Get out there, get out there, get out there." The ceiling closed over him and then lifted away to a pinpoint of light. I've been trying to read this Sextopple Ridge. Will watched the greenish vapor inch across their trenches below, the clouds slowly advancing from the German line in a solid wall, 10 feet high, several hundred feet wide. "Son of a bitchin' wind," someone muttered. "Now listen to me," Will said. "Key in your handkerchiefs like I told you before. That's the only thing that will save you. Have them ready to cover your face." Artillery fired, a shrieking howl. "Stay down!" A deafening burst. He waited until the gun ceased. "Hold position!" He waited until the wind had blown the gas cloud due west. "Get out there!" Not one of the men in the left flank moved. "Come on, you bunch of slouchers. Are you coming out there with me?" Nobody stirred. "They're all dead, Will. They're all dead." Michael Isaacs crawled toward him. They couldn't stop now for them. Not now. "Advance!" 20-odd survivors in the platoon followed Will down the hill. Khaki blanketed the field. "You, Smith, Holly, "Pick up those guns," he yelled, spotting Lee Enfield rifles beside the fallen British soldiers. Those who were still on their feet picked their way through the wounded and dead, stumbling, gagging, coughing up bubbles of greenish saliva that poured out their mouths and over their chins. "Keep straight on," Will yelled to them, pointing behind them to the hill. "Get to the other side of the ridge." Nearing the trenches, Will rallied the platoon. "Gather the wounded. Get them the hell out of here," he kept repeating. A visor snapped under his boot. He stared down at a dead soldier whose eyeball rested against his cheek. Curled over the man's chest, another corpse oozed blood from its mouth. Nearby, a soldier fumbled to unfasten the top button of his tunic before he fell forward and vomited. Will knelt before him, ripping open the man's tunic. The man smiled, his mouth covered with blood-tinged foam. Close by, a shell exploded, shaking the ground beneath them. The man choked, gasping for breath. Will turned him over and sat him upright, pounding his upper back in an attempt to clear his airway. The man became quiet. A pair of larks perched on a tree branch just above the German trench, a stone's throw away. "Look up at the nest builders, lad," said Will. The man's eyes fixed a sightless gaze. "Come on, Will, get up out of there." Michael Isaacs tugged on him. Will regained his feet. "It's no use. Look at this mess. We'll never pull them out." Bodies layered the trench floor, one soldier upon another. Some slumped halfway over the wall, their boots resting on twisted corpses. Those men who were still alive lay bleeding and coughing, their faces streaked with greenish-yellow mucus, the dead entangled among them. Forlorn hope, stacked and silenced, laid down by high command. "Help me, please. I can't make it. My feet are freezing." "The chlorine has done that to you, son. Hang on to me," said Will, pulling the man erect. "Till my ransomed soul shall find rest beyond the river," Michael Isaacs sang, with some of the men joining in. Hours later, as they passed through Silent Deep, a dog whined at their feet. "Talking to myself, sir?" he asked, slurring his words. When I yelled out, he rubbed his numb arms. "We lost half our artillery those weeks." The conductor motioned for the onlookers to move away. "I know all about this, son. I was wounded at Hill 60. The conductor eased himself into the vacant seat opposite. The good man had ensured that no one had taken the seat the whole way through from Montreal. He leaned closer and spoke in a half-whisper. Tens of thousands never got up from Hill 60. Over yonder, warps the mine and rats were what kept a man from being bored. And what? You woke up and fell asleep in it. Chaps got careless and lifted up to take a peek. The silence before Hill 60 was ghastly. Made us think Fritzy weren't about. Will tried to meet the conductor's gaze, but fatigue pressed over him. The old man had been there, he had seen. The conductor rose to his feet, but noticing something on the floor, bent down. "Wouldn't do to lose these. Not at the point of return." He handed Will his photographs and walked away. Will thumbed one photograph over the next. Infant Helen, the cracked tintype of his mother, Michael Isaacs. He studied pensive Leah, who had worn his gift of ivory pins in her hair on her wedding day to James. Will closed his eyes tightly, gripping the bottle. Will recalled the summer day they had begun to meet in the copse, dog days by the shallows, bloodsuckers on the bottom, stones dried gray smooth. "Mind not to burn your toes," she whispered. A robin bathed in the middle of the river. Leah touched his kneecap, drawing circles with her finely tapered fingers. "Take succor, Will, our being yet so young." He moved closer, and they sat side by side, and it was until it was time for him to go back to the fields. As Will capped the Mickey, he caught the stare of the matron across the aisle. "Good day, ma'am. Rough track, isn't it?" The train sped across an open expanse, and Lake Ontario formed a straight line with the southern sky, the purplish violet lake against an azure sky. "You mustn't go, not because of me. You mustn't," Leah had begged him. She had spoken these words beneath the oak by the still deep pool. But with declaration of war, he had left. The train whistle blew 4 short blasts. If the conductor were to approach him now and offer some kindness, he might break. Where had his strength gone? Wasn't 35 rather young for his body to hurt so much? Will stared down at the Mickey, leaned over and placed it firmly into his haversack. He reached for the water canteen, but it was dry. Soon the train would arrive in Trenton, and he would have to find a place to stay for the night. He could make it home by tomorrow. But what if I don't? What if I stay on the train like before? He could live alone again. And cheaply, like he had when he'd gone to the West. A bed, a table, some cooking pots, a few books. He wouldn't need much money now that he'd given up meat. He could get a job, any job. The train was now passing through Tyendinaga, Michael Isaac's reserve. The countryside lay flat and bare except for a stand of tall spruce, the limbs leaning northward with the continuous winds off Lake Ontario. Scrub cedar jutted up amid patches of yellow-brown grass, just as it had years ago when he had accompanied his father and ailing mother to the hospital in Kingston. Now the sight of tar-papered shacks, black-haired children playing with lacrosse sticks in a yard made him bitter. Beside him, his photographs had spilled out of their case again. One of Michael in civvies taken in Bethune, France, just 6 weeks ago. He appeared gaunt and lined, aged. In the early years of the war, Michael had organized softball and taught lacrosse. He had been considered one of the most accurate snipers in the whole of the Canadian contingent. Mikey the Red, the men had nicknamed him. His fame grew, though, when one day a dog tore through the ruts and craters of no man's land, heading straight for their trench. The Germans had sicked a dog on them. Michael Isaac had pegged it. Talk had traveled through the lines and down the supports to base camp. Till my ransomed soul shall find rest beyond the river. Will sang out. "You'll have to be quiet, Sergeant Nicol," the conductor said, his eyes glistening through his spectacles. "It's incumbent on me, sir. You must not infer. It's the hymn that Michael sang going out from Gravelstoffel Ridge." And those bigots in Queen's University in Kingston barred Michael's admission to study medicine, even though he passed the prerequisites. He read honors. He doctored the platoon, our platoon, right the way through. He knew the band's traditional remedies. And since Armistice Day, he looked after me all those past months at the monastery. Will got to his feet. His head was swimming. Michael badgered the officers for books, but we lost a lot of poetry and philosophy in the trenches. The conductor frowned, looking directly at him. So he died. Is that what happened, son? No, he stayed in France. He wouldn't come home. The fault rests with me. That's why he didn't come home. Will removed his handkerchief, wiped his face, steadied himself. He gripped the chair. "Forgive me, sir," he whispered. "I've a lot of work back home there. Get the place in shape for my widowed niece, Leah." A short while later, Will felt a tap on his shoulder. The conductor passed him a mug of tea. There were oatmeal biscuits on the saucer. "Trenton Station will be 15 minutes, the conductor said. He indicated the window. "Look out there. I know the difficulties of returning. Live simple. Time will heal. And buy your tobacco over at the store opposite the station. It's cheaper." The conductor made his deliberate way down the side aisle and passed through the doorway of the car. The tea was strong and sweet. The conductor had ignored the Mickey. He could have ordered him off the train. He hadn't blathered nonsense, the usual wisecracks about the French women. Will gathered up his photographs, stacked them inside their player's clay case, and snapped the lid shut. He unbuttoned his shirt and carefully placed the tin case inside his money belt. That's the end of the first chapter. Well, I'm very happy to say that Madoc Public Library, Tammy, has accepted the book here. And I have taken it, and they accepted it at Belleville Public Library as well, and Kingston, and the Royal Military College in Kingston have also a book to lend. And they're actually looking at that book, reading it to see if perhaps they can use that in the training of their cadets. I don't know. The Ottawa Public Libraries have also accepted just last week, and it also is in two private libraries at Temple Israel and at Family Library at the JCC, Greenberg Family Library. So it's getting around, and that's what I'm pushing is libraries, trying to get it to for people to read. It can be purchased from me. It can be purchased at Amazing Coffee. Quinty Arts Center is put on.